I feel like I just did coke.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even get 5 minutes of. I'll hit it up during. Hey, it ain't live TV.
And the critical question, Vinny, how's the hair? Perfect.
Yeah, it is. I hate you.
Gonna get it cut tomorrow.
Now is the winter of our discontent. Hi.
Wow. This changes
Closed
everything.
set. Closed set.
Exactly. We're gonna take our clothes off here.
Hi, kids.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you? Don't say hello.
I just ate all your bread and butter. It's really
Oh, yeah, I
good.
wouldn't think of it. Oh, it's fabulous.
Hi.
Well, pretty rad, huh? Really nice.
Tweet, tweet, tweet.
Unbelievable. All right. So what am I doing now?
Okay, kids.
You're
see ya.
sitting there. No, sit, have a seat.
No, I just got look. I
Yeah.
want to get out of this room. I'll see you guys later.
Hi. You're gonna do a little hi, we're here, blah blah blah, right? And then
We're here, we're queer. We're getting
Is this
shit on
okay,
the road.
Vinny?
huh?
Is this okay?
Okay, wait, what am I saying? Hold on. Where was I? I had this all. The signal.
It's like the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve.
We're ready. 5, 4.
Hello, this is William Berger in a beautiful garden in Chelsea. This is not my apartment. I wish it were. And I'm here talking with Jeff Stone, who is an institution at Dignity New York and a personal role model of mine, actually, which ought to scare the hell out of you, Jeff. Hi.
Yeah, it does.
Good. And we've been talking about the issue of gay marriage, which is very current right now. And Jeff, we've been hearing a lot about this on television, reading a lot in the magazines, and I want to know, is this hype, is this sort of the fashion du jour, or is this a really important issue?
Well, I think it's a really important issue for us, Will, because I think that until we have at least the option of marrying, until we have the right to marry under civil law, we remain, in some sense, second-class citizens.
So you think it's as important as the military issue?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think like the military, not everybody would choose to enter the military, but I think it's something that we all want the right to do if we wanted to do that. And I think marriage is a similar issue, that it's something that we want the right to do, even if we wouldn't personally choose to do it.
Right. And why do you think there is such opposition to gay marriage? Why? Let's put it this way. Why do you think it scares so many people, including many gay people?
Yeah. Well, I think for non-gay people, it goes, right to the heart of their conceptions of themselves and what their relationship is, and there's all this anxiety about the family, and I mean, straight couples have a hard time staying together too, as we all know.
God, no.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of that anxiety is projected onto gay people. I think for gay people, it's a whole issue of, is marriage really a straight institution, or is it an institution that will work for gay people as well, for gay, lesbian, bisexual people?
And what are your thoughts on that, personally?
Personally, I think it is an institution that can work for us. I think that, a lot of people have done critiques of marriage. A lot of feminists have done some very interesting and provocative critiques of marriage, and they've revealed that a lot of marriage isn't necessarily about the relationship between two people. It's always about power as well. It can be about economics, but I think at its heart, it really is the personal relationship between two people. And in fact, I think this is what gay and lesbian people have to offer the straight community, to renew the idea that marriage is about a relationship between two people. I mean, with all the other things that go with it, it may be about benefits and having a home together and even having children, but it's fundamentally about that relationship between two people.
Now, that's a very interesting point. I want to see if I've got that in my pea brain here, because we've been talking about what the institution of marriage can offer us as it exists, and what you're bringing up is what we can offer to the institution of marriage. And because God knows, as it stands now, it's not a perfect institution.
Right.
So tell me a little bit more about that. What do you think we as gay people can offer the jaded and rotting institution of marriage?
Well, I think that because as gay people we haven't had the option to marry, and our relationships haven't been recognized, we've had to create those relationships completely on our own with very little social support. And so those relationships have been, in order to survive, they've had to develop certain strengths and resources, and we've had to see what it is about the relationship between two people that makes us want to stay together. And of course, those social supports are very important in helping our relationships develop. So that's one of the things that we, particularly as Catholic gay and lesbian people, are saying not only to the society, but to our church also, that this relationship is good, it is holy. I mean, as Christians, we believe that marriage is a sort of sacred covenant between people that is a kind of mirror of the way that Christ relates to humanity.
That's pretty heavy stuff.
That's pretty heavy stuff. But I think until the general public realizes that gay relationships, though they may be different in some ways, are as positive and as valuable as straight relationships, then I think we won't really have achieved true equality.
I'm loving this. I'm seeing headlines: queers save marriage, proclamations coming out of Rome. It's a whole new idea to me. Okay, now you work with Dignity National, and forgive me, but I forget your exact title, but, well, why don't you tell us?
Well, let's just say I'm on the National Board of Dignity, and I represent the chapters in the states of New York and New Jersey. There are 12 chapters.
I see. It's sort of like the Curia. Okay. And now what is Dignity as a national group doing to promote this issue or promote awareness of it, or, well, you tell me what we're doing.
Well, like a number of groups, we've signed on to the marriage resolution, which I believe was formulated by some people at Lambda Legal Defense, which states that marriage between two people of the same sex, of course, is something that we should have the right to do. Beyond that, we have a member in Hawaii who's on the governor's commission there, which is looking into the consequences and the discrimination that results when two people of the same sex are not allowed to marry. So it's getting very high level attention there, and Dignity is there at that level.
And that's in Hawaii, sort of ground zero of this whole issue.
That is ground zero. I mean, that's where the court decision is going to be coming out of, that is going to let us know where this whole issue is going from here.
Yes, that ought to be rich. Now, in Dignity New York, of course, we've celebrated some commitment ceremonies, some marriages, and we're continuing to do so. Can you tell us anything about that, what we offer people?
We offer people the opportunity to make contact with Catholic clergy, who will, in many cases, perform union ceremonies for them. Some people call them marriages. Some people really use a kind of traditional Catholic marriage service. Other people design their own ceremony and call it a union or a blessing or something like that. But we have had a number of them in the chapter. We've had a couple during our regular masses. Usually, though, the couple arranges to do it at another time and fill the church with their friends and relatives and have a big celebration.
Have we had any requests for an annulment yet?
Not that I know of.
Not yet. We'll look into
We'll
that.
have to establish a tribunal right away.
Yes, that ought to be interesting. Now, I had one of these, not at Dignity, but I had a commitment ceremony with my lover, and we were traditional. We had rings on. And I've got to tell you, the whole world changed. Everybody treated me different. In business, it was a whole different situation. I wonder if people have thought about what effect it would have to consider themselves married to their lovers. Have you thought about this at all?
Yeah, I have. I have thought about it. I have a partner that I've been with almost 2 years. And
Yes, I was meaning to get to that.
and it's something we've definitely considered. It's something we'll probably do at some point. But I think it's something that I would want to think about really carefully, exactly what kind of service would I want to have. But yeah, I think I would like to have one.
Does he know this, or is this the first time he's going to hear this on television?
I don't know. We'll find out when we watch it together.
Yes, that ought to be interesting as well. Okay, and now let's see. And you would choose to do this in the context of Dignity somehow?
Well, I think I would. Dignity has been my spiritual community for almost 8 years, so it would feel strange not to do it there. It's my faith community, and a faith community in in Catholic belief, is a community where you mark the milestones of your life, and this certainly is a major milestone of my life.
Oh yeah, that would be. Now there are other churches in New York that perform union ceremonies and various supports for gay unions. Do you know anything about that?
I know that various churches take different approaches to it. I believe that MCC performs them regularly. And most of the other Christian denominations, you'll find clergy who are sympathetic and open to this. It really varies from denomination to denomination, and I don't really know enough about it to give specific information.
But it's true that nobody gets any sort of official recognition from the state or from a national church body, other than MCC, but I mean an established Christian church that's not a specifically gay church. Is that correct? Am I confused on that?
As far as I know, that is correct. I don't think that there are any any churches that do perform what they would term a marriage. There are many who will sanction a blessing or a union or something like that.
So we're all sort of in the same boat, taking kind of baby steps with this in a way, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we are. And I mean, you see stories in the media all the time about, one congregation of Baptists or Congregationalists or whatever will decide that they want to go ahead and support gay relationships and have a union ceremony. And then there'll be a firestorm, either within the congregation or their sort of governing body will get all upset about it, and there'll be discussion on that level. But I think all the churches are kind of dealing with the question in baby steps, like you said.
Do you see any hope for this issue?
I definitely see hope for this issue. I mean, I think there's two different issues here. I think civil marriage is one thing, and I think you're seeing more and more support for that among the general population and among Catholics. Actually, Catholics as a whole support the right of couples, same-sex couples, to marry. It's almost half now say that.
Really?
Yeah, it's almost half say that they believe that relationships between same-sex couples can be holy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sanction, marching down the aisle to Mendelssohn.
Right.
But
I agree with them there, but never mind that.
But I think it's really moving in that direction.
There's a growing sense among, I think, all American people that some sort of recognition is valid. It always seems to fall apart when we claim to have equal, when we claim that our relationships are in any way equal to man on top, woman on bottom, and children happening. I think that's where it tends to fall apart in debate. Now, as far as the children issue, there is that, because, whenever we bring this up, somebody's going to get up, thumping Leviticus, and say, you have to have children. The purpose of marriage is to procreate. And of course, we know in that argument that heterosexual couples are not required to state intent or ability to procreate. But that bit of logic doesn't seem to impress anybody. What do you have to say toward that?
Well, I think you pointed out the inconsistency really well. I mean, at this point, it's really a prejudice masquerading as logic, because, in fact, straight couples are never asked, are you fertile, are you infertile? In fact, the church asks... Exactly. Older people can marry, couples who are physically incapable of having children can marry. And what the church is recognizing there is part of its own doctrine, that marriage is not simply for having children. I mean, that is one of its sort of stated goals, but it is to create unity between the two people involved. The poet Audre Lorde, really delves...
Love her.
She delves into this really deeply in her writing, and in an almost theological way, that this creation of unity is in itself a holy thing. And also this whole idea of procreation is not to be interpreted, in many people's opinion, just as producing a child. There's many ways to be procreative.
Tell me some.
Well, I think people are procreative in their work, whether they're working with young people or not. Mm-hmm. I think most of us are attempting to leave something behind that will make the world a better place than when we were here. We're attempting to sort of generate life and joy and that I think is procreation, and many Catholic theologians are stating exactly that. So I think there's even room in Catholic theology for this to happen.
Sure, because many Catholic theologians are not in a position to procreate publicly either, right?
I think there you go. I mean,
There may be some connection, ally, strange bedfellows there.
That's right. That's right. I mean, a church that until fairly recently said that celibacy was a higher state than the married state has got to realize that, I mean, that's sort of sick in one sense, but it's also recognizing that having children is not the only way to contribute to the world.
It's funny to wave procreation at us after taking that stand for a mere 2 millennia.
That's right.
However, not too surprising. Okay, so I'm looking forward to your wedding, Jeff.
Well, I'm looking forward to yours as well someday.
Good. Well, I'll definitely invite you, and you're invited to dance. You're all invited. We've been talking with Jeff Stone, and...
Mazel tov.
God, yeah, right.
Okay, good. Just do a closing in case
Yeah.
we need one.
Good idea. Thank you for joining us as we've been exploring the issue of gay marriage. My head is spinning. This issue is much more complicated and far-reaching than I had thought, or than the magazines and periodicals had led me to believe. At Dignity, we are working in support of gay marriage as a civil right, but also as a sacrament within the Catholic Church. It's going to be a very long battle. And keep in touch with us here at the Gay Catholic Hour. We'll keep you posted on this important issue. Thanks. Nowhere to hide since you pushed my
You sing
love
into the mic?
aside. I'm out of my mind, hopelessly devoted to you. Happy for me, we've achieved phone numbers.
Who, with this person?
Yes.
Okay, whenever you're ready, from 5, 4.
What the hell am I saying?
You want to wait?
Let me take a breath. Hello, we're here in the Dignity office, the Holy Office on Christopher Street, and talking about the gay marriage issue. We spoke with Jeff Stone about current issues in the papers. What am I doing?
We don't-
Hello, William Berger here with Gay Catholic Hour. We're talking about the gay marriage issue, which is not just a current issue. Apparently it's been going on in various forms through history. And to talk about that and other aspects of this important issue, we're here with Paul Halsall, who is an institution at Dignity, and you can't see it too well, but it says, "Do you know your history?" So this guy definitely has a historical angle here. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
Okay.
Now, what do you have to tell us about this subject? We were talking before, and you were saying that this has gone on in the past. There have been what you might call gay marriages. Now, I don't think people know a lot about that. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, sure. You know, one of the commonest arguments made about marriage between people of the same sex is that no such thing can happen because marriage, by definition, is a relationship between a man and a woman. Well, that is simply not true. I'm not trying to argue that throughout the past there have always been same-sex unions, but in sufficiently diverse societies over a long period of time, there have been, we now know, same-sex marriages. And what I mean by marriage is a public, recognized relationship between people living together. So, for instance, we can go back as far as ancient Egypt and find tombs of people who were married. In ancient China, we know that for centuries, the Chinese emperors under the Han Dynasty, they had their boyfriends, basically, listed in official histories. The Chinese had some of the best official histories, and they listed the boyfriends of the Han emperors. In China, again, not just amongst the upper classes, but amongst the lower peasant classes in Fujian province, which is just north of Hong Kong. In the 17th century, Jesuit missionaries and Chinese writers of the time give us lots and lots of information about marriages where they were celebrated publicly. They were the in-laws treated the boy, normally older, younger man, not too much older, not too much younger. They treated the younger man as their son-in-law. So it's not just China also.
Okay, where do we need to go back to?
On the top.
No way.
Wait.
He forgot to turn it on.
No, I did. There's a short in one of these wires, which it'll hold for now, but...
Okay, this was good. Do you mind going down
Okay.
that again? Because that's good. Okay.
Okay. Ready?
Hello, William Berger for the Gay Catholic Hour, and we're talking about the issue of gay marriage. We're sitting here in the Dignity Office, the Holy Office on Christopher Street, and one of the things that we're often told about this issue by Giuliani, for example, Mayor Giuliani and others, is we're asking for too much too soon. No one's ever heard of gay marriage before, and so we're here with Paul Halsall, who is an institution at Dignity, and I don't know if you can see this, but he's wearing a t-shirt that says, "Do you know your history?" So you can see where he's coming from on this, and he'll talk to us a little bit about this angle and other angles of this important issue. So, hi Paul, you were telling us some interesting things about a historical background of gay history.
Okay. I think taking the historical angle on same-sex unions is really very important. The main reason for that is that one of the commonest arguments made against homosexual marriage is that marriage, by definition, is between men and women. Now, let me say, the historical basis for that goes to the law code of Justinian, which goes back to the 3rd century in Rome. So it is a Roman law maxim. But when we look at history throughout the world, we do find that in quite a wide variety of cultures and quite a wide variety of times, we find gay marriages. Now, what do I mean by marriage? By marriage, I mean a publicly recognized union between two people of the same sex with some sort of public commitment ceremony and some expectation they will live together for some time. So, for instance, if we look at ancient Egypt, we find tombs of people buried together, including 2 Egyptian nuns we have who were buried together. We have, from China, some very good information. For instance, in the Han Dynasty, all the emperors had their boyfriends, and they were recorded in official state history. In fact, one of the oddities is, since all the early Roman emperors are bisexuals with lovers, for about 200 years the entire world, if you take the Roman Empire and China, was ruled by bisexual men. So
Now, whenever I speak to people historically about this and they're opposed to the issue of gay marriage, they always seem to imply that those weren't marriages as we understand them. In other words, they didn't have sex together. Of course, there's no way of knowing, but what can we know about this? Were these unions where people slept together and had sex, at least sometimes, as we would understand this?
Well, I mean, I'll talk about the Christian things later, but actually some of our best information comes from Catholic writers. As it happens, some of our best information about China, about Japan, and also about North America is from missionaries. Now, again, let's take China. In Fujian province in the 17th century, there are descriptions of marriages. The Chinese word for marriage is used. The relationships are described. They were public. They were between the mothers-in-law recognize their new sons-in-law. And also you get the occasional lesbian marriage in China from the same period as well. In North America, there was a tradition of sex marriage, although there was a gender differentiation, it would be like a butch guy marrying an effeminate man. There's no, I'm not saying anything wrong with it, but that's how it was. Publicly recognized.
Right. That's rather famous. We hear a lot about that.
They're called berdashes normally. It's a French word, and that's quite common.
It's also a nice bar in Montreal.
Well, there's lots of nice bars in Montreal. So there is, there's a lot of evidence here. And my argument would be is that if marriage between two people of the same sex is conceivable, then it's possible. Marriage is a social institution, and any social institution changes. For instance, for all that people talk about the Bible and biblical ethics, there's not one word in the Bible against polygamy. If you want to have biblical ethics, reinstitute plural marriage immediately, just like all those great polygamists of old.
That's true about lesbianism as well, isn't it?
I'm not sure what you mean there.
There's no biblical mention of it.
Well, some people see a lesbian meaning in the Ruth and Naomi story.
Of course.
There's a book by Tom Horner called David and Jonathan, which addresses that, and he does argue for that.
Now, where I come from, in East Los Angeles, there is a system of men and women, too, with each other, taking on somebody officially in, what's called compadrazgo. And it's not implied that you're sleeping with them, but there is the system of a public declaration of you are mine and I am yours and you're bound for life.
Okay, let me address that. When we're looking at marriage, we're really looking at the issue of artificial kinship. Okay? There are various forms of artificial kinship, and these vary from society to society. For instance, in many Christian countries, one of the ways you can become someone's kin is by becoming the godparent of their child.
Right.
And it's called co-godparenthood. It's very common in East North.
Right, that's what we were doing.
Yeah, okay. In many other societies, you can have a form of brotherhood. Okay? And there's all sorts of artificial brotherhoods. Some of these are very not very strong relationships.
Right.
Others of them are very strong relationships, as strong as kin.
Right.
Okay. Now, one of the issues is, when we use the word brotherhood, we almost never use that word to describe the relationship between two brothers. I may have brotherhood with you, but I don't have brotherhood with my brother.
I didn't even know you had one.
Well, you see, that's it. And this is true in lots of other languages as well. Fraternity in French is not a relationship between two sons of the same mother or the same father. So we find that brotherhood is very often used to describe a relationship which is marital. For instance, in Fujian province, which I talked about before, where there's no real problem with saying it was a marriage because it's described as such. Still, the brothers, the couple call themselves older brother and younger brother because that brotherhood and the relationship between siblings is very often a model for a sexual or erotic relationship. And we see that, for instance, in the Song of Songs. Everyone acknowledges it's about sex between a man and a woman, but they call each other brother and sister.
Right.
Now, if they are brother and sister, it's incest.
Yeah, clearly.
Another biblical bummer,
Right.
so to speak. So
That's really interesting, though. So everybody has some sort of a system, and we all use this word brotherhood. And there are many times when I've looked in old texts and seen that word and wondered, what exactly do they mean here? And it seems that there's been an effort to eliminate, a conscious effort to eliminate any possibility of me as a gay person recognizing a gay relationship in these texts. My Revised Standard Bible even adds a footnote to the David and Jonathan story and says David and Jonathan formed an intense friendship to make sure I didn't imagine them having sex. It seems almost that there's a conspiracy of silence that we're trying to reverse more than that we're trying to invent a past.
Well, I'm not too into conspiracies about the past. David and Jonathan met each other. They became good friends, stripped naked, exchanged bows and arrows, and formed a covenant. And David looked after Jonathan.
Sounds good to me.
I mean, both of them had sex with women as well, of course. But David, after Jonathan was killed, looked after Jonathan's son. And you can read that in the first and second book of Samuel. It's quite a nice love story, in fact.
Right.
But what we have to think about is, switching to a sort of Jewish and Christian view of marriage here, is what is it about? What is erotic love about? Okay, now, mostly in the Jewish Bible, erotic love is about having children and preserving the continuity of a people who are very often under attack. Within Christianity, that's not quite the same thing. The New Testament doesn't use the word eros at all, by the way, not once. But there is a place for erotic love, and what is it? If we see that erotic love is to create children, then there's no real place for homosexual marriage within Christianity. However, if we see erotic love as connected with brotherhood, as creating connection right now, you and I would be connected in brotherhood, that's a good immediately. That's not some finality sometime in the future, which is what Roman Catholic texts talk about. That is what eros should be about from a Christian perspective. And I suppose the ultimate reason that you're interviewing me here is that there are texts within the Christian tradition which describe brotherhood as what can only be seen as an erotic relationship between two men.
Now, I want to talk more about this. It's not the only reason I'm interviewing you, but do you think this is something we could know more about to counter the procreation argument, which is something we always get against us, as you know? Marriage is about procreation, which, of course, we know church law does not uphold because people who are incapable of procreating are allowed to marry. But is this something we should look into as a counter-argument to the procreation issue?
That's not true. Church law forbids people who can't procreate. If you don't have a penis, for instance, you can't get married. Now,
that's true, but a postmenopausal woman can marry.
Yes, but there's always a possible miracle, they say.
Good point, as there is with two men, I suppose.
Okay, yes. The procreation argument is simply wrong. It's not a Christian description of marriage. Christianity had no real place for marriage for many centuries. It had rules about how you should behave to your husband or how you should behave to your wife, just as it had rules about how you should relate to your slaves or your children. Right. But marriage didn't take place in church in the East really until the 3rd, perhaps later, 4th, 5th, 6th centuries, and in the West not until the 11th century. So marriage taking place in church is quite a late development. Now, one of the odd things is the relationships that did have ecclesiastical blessing earlier seem to have been between two men.
Really? That seems to predate any other marriages?
To predate.
What do you mean,
I'm not saying they were marriages.
Okay.
Okay. I'm saying that they were consecrated love relationships. And this is where John Boswell comes in, of course.
Right.
So I suppose everyone knows John Boswell, Yale historian.
Do not suppose that everyone knows.
Okay,
Tell us about it.
John Boswell, Yale historian, who wrote this book in 1980,
Visual Aid.
Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality.
Good book.
It's a fairly good book. It gets some things wrong. It has to be said. Boswell gets some things wrong, but basically he opened up this as a serious area of study. Boswell's more recent book was called Same-Sex Unions in Pre-Modern Europe. And what he argued, and here he does argue for a conspiracy, is that he has 70 manuscripts, and that's a lot from the Middle Ages, for instance. He has 70 manuscripts, roughly, of ceremonies called in Greek adelphopia, or brother making,
Right.
which he argues were same-sex union ceremonies. Now, he doesn't say that they were marriages. Marriage had a definition in Roman law as a relationship between a man and a woman. So these wouldn't have been called marriages, but they did function like marriages. That was,
What were they?
what do you mean, what were they?
What were they? Were these two people sleeping together? Were they sharing property? Did they have privileged relationship status?
Let me, I'm going to need to go in a little bit deeper here. One of the things that people often say is that all early Christians had to be married to have sex. Well, people who say this don't seem to realize that within the Roman world, most people simply couldn't get married.
Right.
Marriage within the Roman world was only possible between two people who were freeborn.
Right.
So you couldn't marry a slave and you couldn't marry a freed person, assuming you were free.
Right.
And St. Augustine is a classic case in point. He lived with a woman for about 16 years in a domestic relationship that everyone accepted. He had a son with her, and when he decided to get all holy and stop having sex, he sent her to live with his mother, who, although she's a saint, was
Another story.
Really tough woman. Okay. Now, was this a marriage? In American law, in Scottish law, it would be a marriage, but in Roman law, it wasn't a marriage. Most early Christians were not married, even if they were having sex. So there was always this problem about describing anything else as marriage. What Boswell thinks is that these texts, originating, he thinks, in the 7th century, represent a tradition of homosexual marriage, or homosexual marriage-like arrangements. Were they having sex? That's the interesting question.
I need to know this for some reason.
Okay, were they having sex? That is, I mean, how do you ever know when someone had sex? But I think I can answer the question. Since Boswell's book, which was attacked by a lot of people, some further research has been done. And what transpires is quite interesting. These relationships seem to have begun as between monks. Okay?
Figures.
Between monks. You take a man called Saint Simeon the Fool, and he had a relationship with his brother, with a man called John, who left his wife to live with Saint Simeon. And they went and lived together for 20 years, praying and receiving the Holy Spirit and all that sort of business in the Syrian desert. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the earliest texts we have about this relationship. Then we find in the 9th and 10th century this relationship being made by Byzantine emperors. For instance, there's and people having the Byzantine emperor become brother with their son, so they'd form a family relationship with him. And you begin to get law cases where people claimed inheritances because their father had been in this brotherhood relationship with someone else. So it was,
So we have this economic model, property.
So it was part of the kinship system of Byzantium.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in the early stage between monks, it probably excluded sex. Later on, it's not clear, it's not discussed whether it was sex or whether it was just another form of relationship.
Now, isn't this...
further on in the
back up a second. Isn't this the same Byzantine Empire that systematically criminalized homosexual acts?
Well,
Aren't we talking about the same place, Justinian and this sort of thing?
Under Justinian, one of his laws, they're called novels, laws. Under Justinian, a law was passed after some earthquakes,
Right.
saying we're going to ban not homosexuality, but sodomy. Sodomy, because...
There's that word again.
Okay, sodomy, because it causes earthquakes.
Right.
And two poor bishops, were dragged through the streets and killed. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, sodomy was always illegal in Byzantium. So were lots of other things, but people did it all the time. However, what did sodomy mean? Sodomy meant anal intercourse. Sodomy meant anal intercourse. And that seems to have been how it was understood. No one was approving of anal intercourse. Let me say, when they married two heterosexuals, they were not approving of, in fact they called it unnatural and against the law, any sex in which the woman was on top,
Right.
sex in which the woman was in a doggy position,
Right.
oral sex, anal sex, all these things were condemned. They were approving a certain form of we might call it a missionary position. So it doesn't speak against the fact that these relationships may have been sexual to say that sodomy was illegal. Sodomy was illegal, but was all homosexual sex. Furthermore, whether laws passed in the 6th century in Latin, a language that the Greeks didn't read by and large.
Right.
You see, in Justinian's time, they still wrote in Latin, but after that they stopped speaking Latin quite soon. By the 13th and 14th century, and in later canon law, we find people beginning to complain, canon lawyers beginning to complain about these relationships, saying they are being misused. And in one Greek Orthodox compilation from the end of the 18th century, it specifically said they're being used for disgraceful purposes, for luxury as a symbol for
Yes.
homosexual. Okay. Now, here's the question. Here is the crux of the matter. Boswell did not show the central authorities of the church in Byzantium, which didn't have strong central authorities of the church, did not show that they approved this ceremony or regulated it or controlled it or said this was marriage. He didn't show that. What he did seem to show was that this ceremony which had a long history in Byzantium, which was a kin relationship between two men, occasionally between two women, but mostly between two men, was being used as a ceremony to commemorate an erotic relationship. Now, did the church approve of this? And I have to say to you, what is the church? Okay, from a Western position, which might say the church begins with God, goes to the Pope and goes down, no, the church didn't approve. But that isn't quite the Orthodox position, and it's not really good Roman Catholic position. The Roman Catholic position and the Orthodox position is that the church is the community gathered around the altar. It's called the Eucharistic vision of the church. What creates the church is the Eucharist. Now, there is really very little doubt, I think, now, that in small, local, Eucharistic communities who were in communion with the entire Orthodox Church, relationships were taking place, celebrated by the community, using this Adelphi rite, that were commemorating erotic relationships in the Christian Church.
And do you think the big guys knew it and looked the other way, or didn't know it? You say they were in communion with the rest of the church.
I think I think that it varied.
Mm-hmm.
I think it varied somewhat. There wasn't that much division between the people in Constantinople and the bishops in local areas, and they certainly knew what was going on. Okay? Now, there's another thing as well. These relationships do not seem to be between people of different ages. These rites, these religious rites, always seem to commemorate a relationship between two people of roughly the same age and sex.
Interesting,
Okay.
Unlike the ancient Greek model.
Now that's it. You see, if the Greeks think of pederasty and homosexuality, the illicit type, as being between an older man and a younger boy, these relationships didn't conform to that, so wouldn't fall under the condemnation.
Right.
So actually more research needs to be done on this, and in fact there's a historian at the University of California at Los Angeles who's doing more research. But some research has been done in the 19th and 20th century showing that these relationships quite definitely were sexual in Eastern Europe in this period. Not only Eastern Europe, however, also in the West.
Really?
Also in the West.
As in the Roman Catholic Church?
As in the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England.
Oh.
Okay, now, okay. First of all, a huge number of Greek speakers live in southern Italy.
Yeah, my family.
Okay, and they were all accepted into the Roman Church with all their liturgical books.
Right.
Okay, including these celebrations of brotherhood relationships, same-sex unions as Boswell calls them. Furthermore, in the 17th, at the end of the 17th century, the French writer Montaigne, backed up, in fact, by the Venetian ambassador, quite separately, we have two records of this, records a group of people getting married in the church of St. John by the Lateran Gate, I think, in Rome, in which they went through all the ceremonies and said, we're having a sexual relationship, we're married in church, living together and having sex is what makes you married. Now, this was attacked, but it was taking place. People were conceiving of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this isn't a new idea.
Right.
This was conceived of.
In St. John Lateran's in Rome.
It's not quite. It's not the Cathedral St. John Lateran. It's another church nearby. Okay, we also get records from England in the 18th century of two lesbians being married by the local parish priest, and it just being reported in the local parish register.
Really?
Oh yes, there's a recent book by an Irish lesbian writer on this. In fact, on the whole history of lesbian marriages. They were described as marriages. In London, in the early 19th century, there was an Anglican minister, a homosexual Anglican minister, Anglican priest, I suppose I should say. We're ecumenical these days.
Yes.
Who saw it really as his duty to perform marriages between people of the same sex. So,
Where do we get that record from? I mean, where is that written down?
Now let me just. Those.
It's well recorded, though. It's well
It's well
documented.
recorded. I actually have a lot of what I'm saying is coming from various documents I've written and which I have made available on the internet. I have an internet website called the Lesbian and Gay Catholic Handbook, and there should be a runner, I think, at the bottom of the.
We'll give you one of those at the end. Okay.
Okay, but the URL, for people who are interested, is http:// here's the hard bit, www.bway.com/tilde, that's the funny squiggly line.
Yes, we know.
Halsall, HALSALL, /lgbh.html. We've got to come up with a better way of naming these sites.
We'll write this down. That's almost as long as one of your essays, Paul.
Okay. Oh, just search for lesbian and gay Catholic in Yahoo, and you will get me. And everything I've got, including the text of these ceremonies, including a record of all the various marriages throughout the world, including reviews of John Boswell's book, it's all there.
Okay, well, I look forward to that. Now, one thing you've made me think about is this. All this talk about what Boswell had studied, and it still comes up to a separate issue from the mainstream marriage issue of that time.
Oh, yes.
Very much. What can we learn from the past? What's the lesson of all of these things?
I'll tell you what we can learn from the past. People in the past develop new ideas. A tradition that is living changes. Marriage is, in fact, still a living tradition, and it changes. What I've been arguing, and what I argue in various documents, is that the idea of same-sex marital relationships has been fairly widespread across time, across culture. What I'm not saying is that these relationships were in the past always accorded equality with heterosexual marriages. Okay? Perhaps, I mean, there's some odd things in Roman poetry, but I won't go into that. But there's enough there that we can claim that this is part of our tradition. There's enough there in human tradition in general, and there's enough there in the Catholic tradition. In the Catholic and Christian tradition, Catholic and other Christian people with a homosexual orientation have sought ways to find church blessings on same-sex relationships. That's what we mean by a marriage. And the Roman Catholic Church is undergoing, and has been undergoing for for about 30 years now, a reevaluation of sex. People don't often realize that it wasn't until 1952 that the Pope said you could even think of having sex without directly intending a child. People think that the rhythm method was a bad form of contraception. Let me tell you, it was forbidden by Rome until the 1950s. Actually, the American bishops allowed it from the 1930s. But in 1952, the Pope said, okay.
I believe they redefined marriage as its intent was to procreate and, help me with the language, it's beautiful.
They make a distinction between the procreative aspect of marriage and the unitive aspect of marriage. Now, as it happens, John Paul II has really pushed this notion of the unitive aspect of marriage.
Ironically.
Okay, and has pushed this notion of marriage as a great way of Christian life. Now, I can tell you absolutely, and there's no shilly-shallying here, that in church history, marriage is definitely second best throughout all of church history. And for the church to be claiming it's supporting marriage, and always has, is simply a lie.
Right.
I mean, it's not true.
Right.
Now, John Paul, I mean, I don't like the guy, frankly. But
Seriously?
Seriously, I think he's an asshole. But, edit that.
I don't think we will.
Seriously. One of the really interesting things about the Pope is that he is prepared to change tradition. Do you know that this is the first Pope ever to have condemned slavery unequivocally?
Yes.
There's no other Pope in history who has condemned slavery unequivocally. The Pope has, in fact, been pushing this notion that marriage is about unity. That means making one soul out of two people. Actually, that is a term used to describe the brotherhood relationship in the earliest record we have, the life of Saint Simeon of Emesa. We have one soul. We have one soul in two bodies. It's between two men. First time I think it's used in Christian history is between two men.
Nice. It's a nice way of putting it, too.
Yes, one soul in two bodies. And the Pope is pushing that. He's pushing our agenda.
I hadn't thought of it that way. I'm going to have to sleep on that. Let me ask you something, Paul. Why do we care?
Why do we care?
Why would it be important to push this issue through the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, some people think I'm very deceived here, but I think that Catholicism provides a system of meaning which is very important in the world. Okay? I think that if you're a Catholic, you actually have a valuable aspect to your life that enables you to see meaning in the physical world. And being very non-ecumenical here, I will say that one of the problems of Protestantism in general has been a devaluing of the physical world. Catholicism has attempted to see the physical world as a way to become holy. Mm-hmm. So it isn't enough for us to say we just want civil homosexual marriage. Of course we want that. Okay, that's almost should be something we're not arguing about at this stage. And that will come, that's certainly coming. But we also want a sacramental approach to this. Okay? And now I'm going to say a heresy. Okay? The Catholic idea sometimes...
You are on camera.
Okay. The things taught by some religious educators that there are only 7 sacraments is not true to history. Okay? The Greek Orthodox Church would regard a monk's vows or a funeral as a sacramental and not really make a big distinction between that and other sacraments. You have the 2 great sacraments, the Eucharist and baptism, and you have a whole lot of other things from which you get grace. Now, Christ did not institute confirmation, no matter what the catechisms said. And I think we have in the history of Adelphopoia, the brotherhood ceremony, a sacramental, something that's clearly a sacramental and something that can be appropriated and understood as a ritual for same-sex union. So, I mean,
That's a good
why,
answer.
That's why it's important.
But
We have a sacramental view of the world.
Roman Catholics before, I think you said the 11th century, the way I understand it, up until fairly recently, a good time after that, if you and I were a man and a woman, and we went home and said, I swear you're my husband, I swear you're my wife, before God, that was legally binding in many parts of Europe. In other words, the big church wedding, as we know, is more of a recent institution that's been growing and growing. Now, if this was good enough for them, I did this with my lover with one priest and nobody else in the room. And we took our vows and we put on rings, and that was the end of that. Why isn't that good enough?
Because marriage is a public ceremony of commitment. And so-called clandestine marriages, which were actually legal in the Roman Catholic Church until 1911, until the first Code of Canon Law was instituted. Clandestine marriages were always an exception and never the perfect expression of marriage. Marriage needs to take place in a public forum. It needs to take place... that's what marriage is. I mean, after all, if you get married in private, how many toasters do you get?
Good point. I don't like toast. What about you? Can you see yourself getting married? Can you see yourself in a public declaration and sacrament of marriage?
Well, if people go to my webpage, they can email me and send a picture, and we'll discuss it.
Well, yes, of course. There is the first step.
Now, yes, I would go through with it. No doubt.
I would love to go to your wedding, Paul, but I'd be afraid of getting a pop quiz at the end of it.
Well, you can, but, what you'd probably get is my registration card from Bloomingdale's. And Bloomingdale's does register gay couples.
Yes,
actually.
they sure do. So do all the department stores in New York that the guy tried, Williams-Sonoma, and, of course, the Leatherman right across the street here.
Yes, it has to be said, as far as I can see, Bed Bath & Beyond is the place where most gay couples are doing their shopping these days.
At least some gay couples. Okay, well, thank you very much. Any closing thoughts on this?
Not really.
Not really. Okay, that'll do fine. Thank you. I've been talking with Paul Halsall on the issue of gay marriage, and we found out that apparently there's quite a history of this. We didn't just come up with it recently to torture Mayor Giuliani, and we'll be talking a lot more with various people on this interesting and very important issue. Thanks a lot. William Berger for the Gay Catholic Hour.